Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I
Yeah.
came across your work and I
hmm
thought it'll be interesting for me to talk to you, see if I can learn a thing or two from you. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And if we can briefly touch upon how people, let's contextualize this. So
hmm
my audience is usually young males
hmm
trying to figure out what they want to do from life and where do they fit in this whole society and how can they navigate.
Okay.
So if we can quickly touch upon what you do, how you do it, and what you teach.
Yeah, okay. I'm a professor, as you know, in economics. I specialize in development economics and international economics. And that means really my interest is in countries outside in general, not
Mm-hmm.
with, within one specific country, but all countries. And for development, it's the developing world. So it's the countries that are not considered developed, which would be all of Latin America, all of Africa,
Mm-hmm.
most of
Southeast Asia too.
Asia, most of Central Asia, etc.
I've always wondered, Professor, that how, on what criteria do we decide which country is developed and which country is developing, and how does the transition works? So let's say if a developing nation does good for itself, like China,
Yes,
in
yes.
past 20 years, 30 years, they have grown into a massive world power.
Yeah.
And how does one decide that the transition is done now?
Well, that's an interesting question because I always have that challenge with my students trying to explain to them how this works. So it is partly a criteria in terms of achievement, things like level of income, the life expectancy, quality of life that the society can produce for its citizens. That's a large part of it, but it's also a club.
A club.
It's also a club. So being considered a developed country, there are criteria that really are not explicit. They are implicit, and so countries that by all criteria should be considered developed are not typically put in the list of developed countries because they probably don't meet certain criteria. And one of the criteria is that they should be sort of quote unquote democratic with a high levels of the political and civil um, political freedoms and civic freedoms as well. The example I often use is Singapore.
Okay.
So by the income criteria, Singapore is is one of the richest countries in the world. By standard of living, it is life expectancy. It would meet all of the criteria that you would normally associate with a developed country, but it the political freedom, political and civic freedoms that it allows for its citizens is not as high as, let's say, you would find in France or in Britain. And so it has not been considered or put in the category of developed. So it's not typically put in the category of developed countries, even though by most of the criteria, levels of education, income, as I said, life expectancy, it outperforms most developed countries. So, to give you an example, Portugal cannot compare to Singapore in terms of most of the criteria that we would associate with developed countries. But Portugal is considered a developed country. Singapore typically is not. I mean, I would put it in the category of developed, but if you look at most lists, then it usually is not because it's not considered part of the club of democratic
Mm.
countries, etc. So,
And I think it's gate kept to some degree that the G7 nations or the G20 nations.
yeah, there is no doubt that there is that's what I mean by a club. It's sort of the group of countries that that many years ago became industrialized and became wealthy, and they considered themselves the developed countries. So that original club would be the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, the Nordic or Scandinavian countries. Have I missed any? Well, Austria, and then Japan, the only non-European or non-European extract country, what they considered countries that were not either European or colonized by Europe or settled by Europeans. So Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada would be considered offshoot. That's the word I'm looking for. So there's Europe and there's the European offshoots. And so, and that's Western Europe, not all of Europe. So Eastern Europe, Southern Europe were not part of that original club. And so that original club has gradually been extended to include other countries, but it's there is no doubt there is a stronger preference for in terms of club inclusion for European countries versus non-European countries, and being a democratic countries and implicit, not an explicit criteria.
And so you're from academics, right?
Yes,
A
yes.
regular guy like me or my brother or anyone on the street would see videos from Singapore and think, oh, it's a developed nation, right?
By all criteria it is. Yeah.
Their infrastructure is on point, their
Yeah.
education system is
Yeah.
doing good, and their even social housing is great, I've heard.
They're superior to most countries.
And
Yes.
they're doing something right, that means.
Yeah,
and
lots of things right. Yeah.
And one of the other things that bugs me every now and then is income inequality, especially in a country like India, where it's we have a huge population, 1.5 billion almost, and by some standards, if I had a decent living, comfortable living, but in India we go to some villages and we see that people are still struggling to
Yes.
make ends meet, and
Yeah.
the disparity is too vast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so GDP per capita reduces because it averages out.
Yes,
and
of course. Yeah.
and
yeah.
we are still in a developing state.
Yeah.
But you look at the prosperity in some of the cities, you're like, how is still a developing nation? And
Well, that's actually not atypical in developing countries. So often when people think of developed and developing countries, they think of sort of extremes, like comparing Sweden with Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone is an underdeveloped country. There's very little in Sierra Leone that you would sort of consider to be advanced technologically or otherwise. Whereas you go to Sweden, there's very little of what you would associate with underdevelopment. There's very little poverty, high levels of technology, the quality of life is very high, etc. But the world is not divided into those extremes. There's more in between, and even among the countries that we consider developing, you would have at one end a Chile or a Argentina, and at the other end perhaps a Burundi, etc., or Laos. But there's lots in between, and even within those countries. And I often tell my students, you can be in a major city in a developing country, and you would have all the amenities and that you would get in any of the developed countries. So, in fact, there are lots of cities in the developing world that are, in terms of the quality of amenities, the infrastructure, etc., that are superior to most cities in developed countries. The difference, however, is that if you go out of those cities a few kilometers, 50 kilometers, it's a different world.
True.
It's a different world. So if you leave Toronto, for example, and you go 100 kilometers. It's rural, it's not as fancy, but it's still, the infrastructure is still high quality, and you're still in a developed country. If you, in Mumbai, as you know, 100 kilometers out, it's a different world.
Well, completely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Similar to Johannesburg or Harare or any of the major cities in the developing world, you will have that effect. It's not so the most livable cities in the world, the most highly developed, the best infrastructure is not necessarily the cities of the developed world. There are some cities in the developing world that have fantastic infrastructure, and some of the cities that I admire the most and have enjoyed the most, like Rio de Janeiro. I don't think any city in the world comes close in terms of just differences. I don't know if you've ever been to Rio, but there's Copacabana Beach at one end, and there's the forest where they have the statue of Christ with the.
Okay,
Yeah.
I haven't been there, but
Yeah.
I've
And
seen the pictures. Looks pretty. Yeah.
And then there's the Sugarloaf Mountain, where you can get cable cars and climb. Within this city, you have all of the extremes, and it's beautiful. I think it's one of the most amazing cities.
I've seen some videos where they have slums called favelas.
That's the point. That's the point. So
people are living
within
in
that
such-
city.
Yeah.
Within that city, you can go from the favela to Copacabana Beach and the area next to it, which is, lovely restaurants and coffee shops, and it's so you have those extremes within those cities, and that's one of the clues that you are in the developing world.
We have something similar in Mumbai too.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest slums. I wonder that these extreme situations that people get into. So what I mean by that is, let's say someone makes decision and does good with his life, right? And someone gets into the downward spiral. My question is that a product of a free will and a free market? Because capitalism allows for a free market. You can do whatever you want.
Yes, yes.
I can do whatever choices I want to
Yeah.
make, and those choices will then have outputs or
Yes,
that varies completely. So do you think that gap can be diminished? Because if everyone makes different choices, there will be different outcomes, right?
Well, I think the best way to think about it is that there is capitalism itself as an idea and as an economic system in which you allow people to engage in exchange, production and exchange. You provide, the government provides the rules and the norms, the institutions that can be used to standardize, to create standards that everybody adhere to, rules that prevent over exploitation or the kind of behavior that creates uncertainty and therefore ruins the system. So you have that. The point of that basic structure is to create the opportunity for wealth creation. And as Marx himself pointed out, human beings have never been able to create a system that can be as productive in terms of how much can be produced from a human labor and machine. So in terms of the ability to simply produce goods and services, we haven't had a system that is as productive as capitalism. However, with it comes a lot of negatives. One is that you have those who own capital are able to get much more out of the system than those who own labor, who sell labor. And if you are excluded from the system in any way, whether it's because of your limited education or your lack of access to some other means of production, then the system itself is not designed to take care of you. Okay, so and what many different countries have tried to do over time. That's how the welfare state was developed, is to try and take care of those that are not well taken care of by the system, because the capitalist system is not a system designed to make human beings happy or comfortable or socially most productive. It's about the production of goods and services. And so the more complex or the, I would say, the non-economic aspects of society, how people get along, how we take care of each other, how families function, how communities function, that these are not the major concerns of a capitalist system, and you have to sort of add this as part of what the society chooses for itself, the governments then implement. So that's why you have Sweden or Norway versus, let's say, the United States, which have very different versions of that same capitalism. So they're all capitalist countries, but the rules and the norms that surround that basic capitalist infrastructure is different. So in a country like Sweden, they have a high tax rate because the government takes it upon itself to ensure that everyone is well taken care of. So if you are not employed, you will get a basic income that will allow you to survive without poverty. Schooling is free right up to university. Healthcare is free. And so, but that is a decision that is made by the society. It's not inherent to capitalism itself. It's what is, many people would call a socialist construct around a capitalist system. And there are different versions of it. Canada, as you know, has a different construct, as I would say, around the basic capitalist infrastructure than the US does. And
can I stop you right there for a second?
Yeah.
So I've always got fascinated by these Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And do you think what they are on a scale of capitalism and socialism, they're more on the scale, somewhere leaning towards socialism with the capitalism framework? They still are more socialist inclined. But do you think that is scalable to a population like 1.2 billion, 300 million, such as in US? Those systems where they have a sovereign...
I don't think anything is not scalable. I think everything is scalable. It's because it's not... Smallness can have its advantages, but it's not a requirement. So as we see, for example, China has developed a very large what we would call a capitalist sector, but it has combined that with a large government control sector, both in especially particularly in the productive sector. So there's a large parts of the Chinese economy that are controlled by state-owned enterprises, and they do not allow or have only very limited room for private enterprises, because they've made that decision that there are some things that the government wants to control. And they're doing it successfully, and they're the second largest country in terms of population after India. And so, no, I don't think that scale is the challenge. It's what societies want and what they are willing to accept, and the constraints that they're willing to put on themselves, and the responsibilities and demands that they put on citizens, government, and other institutions. So it's in the end, it's what societies choose for themselves. There's a wide range of possibilities. One can go in the extreme where it's every man for himself. It's a capitalist economy. If you do well, good for you. If you do poorly, tough luck. Or you can have a society in which you do have a capitalist framework, but there's an infrastructure to take care of those that are not particularly well done by the capitalist system. So I don't think scale is the problem. I think it's whether the society is willing to make the decision and implement that decision and create the institutions necessary to do what it wants to do. Yeah.
True. I've always thought that telling 100 people to do something is easier than telling 1,000 people to do same thing, so...
Well, that's what institutions do. And if you are raised in a society in which there is a specific norm, what everybody does, so this is what your parents tell you is the normal thing to do, then no one has to tell you to do it. Okay. So I'll give you a very simple example, and I'll probably, I'll use one from India.
Sure.
So you're Indian. If
Yes.
your parents, are your parents in India or here?
They're here.
So do you live with your parents?
No.
Yeah. But if your parents, their health is declining,
True. Yeah.
what would you think is the normal thing to do?
I'll stay with them till their health is better or give them care till... Yeah.
Yeah. But you wouldn't think first thing, I'm going to get them a home where someone is going to take care of them and I'll just pay them to take care of my parents.
That would be the last resort if I'm way too occupied in my life or...
Yeah, but it's not the first resort.
Yes.
And if you did it, you'd feel very guilty.
100%.
Why?
I'll feel guilty because I've been taught that we should take care of our older ones.
That's exactly the point.
So that's conditioning.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes. Yes.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give you another very simple example. So quite a lot of my students are Nigerian, and several of them are Yoruba, from a particular ethnic group in Nigeria. And in that ethnic group, if you walk into a room with an older person, you can't sit down unless they tell you can't sit down. So this, and I keep forgetting that. So they'll come into my office and stand up, and I'll look up and say, "Why aren't you sitting down?" And say, "You haven't asked me to sit down."
That's a way of honoring the wisdom you have.
Yes, which is fine. I think it's beautiful. But what I'm saying is that even though they're outside of the culture that they grew up in, it's conditioning. That's what they've learned is the norm, and it would be very hard for them to do otherwise, because that's the norm for them. That's conditioning, and they would if they went against it, they would feel bad. I might not even notice, but they would feel that they were rude. They sat down without asking me. So these are the ways in which societies determine what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, what should be done, what should not be done. And it isn't that people have, if you're at the point where you have to tell people that this is going to be repeatedly, that this is the way things are going to happen, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, then you probably failed. You haven't created the right institutions. And when I talk about institutions, I'm talking about rules and norms, things that people think are acceptable, normal, in fact, required. Okay. So the idea that if you walk into a room of people, you say hi is a rule. It's an institution. It's a norm. And you would feel bad if you didn't do it, and the people who were in the room when you walked in would feel that you were rude. And so no one has to stand up and say, you walked into the room, you must say hi. It's done. Everybody moves on. Nobody even notices.
True. Yeah.
That's how. When this works well, societies function well. and people are able to get the best out of that social system. When people have to be herded and pushed and prodded and harangued, it's likely either the institutions are improperly developed or are not working, or they have broken down. Once you can create those institutions, those norms, those ideas of what's normal, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, then it's not that difficult to get the kind of society you want. But it has to be constructed. We don't see the society around us as being a construct. We see it as being just normal. That's just the way society is. But and just to make the point, if you were to go, how many countries have you traveled to?
3 or 4 so
Three
far.
or four. Anyone that's very different from India, besides Canada?
Mexico was different. Dubai is different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how much time did you spend there?
And Mexico? Or,
Either one, yeah.
10, 15 days in both countries?
Yeah.
Around 15 days, yeah.
Okay. So one of the things you'll notice when you go to a new country is that you feel like a child.
True, because I don't
You
know.
don't know what, should I do that? Should I not
What
do
rules
that?
apply
What
and-
should I say? Is it okay if I do this? It's not okay if I do that? Everyone's doing this and I'm not sure why they're doing this. The reason why this is happening is that you are encountering a different set of institutions, a different set of norms, a different set of rules about what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. Once you learn what those norms are, then it becomes easy. But that's an illustration of the fact that each society has a different set. So there are commonalities, of course, but each society has its own set of rules and norms that people follow. And the members of this society don't even think about it.
True. Something similar happened with me when I immigrated to Canada. I went to college and everybody would call professor by their name.
Yes.
And that was a very big change for me. I'm like, he's a professor, call him sir or give him some salutation, you know? So,
Yes.
But, and that was a big change for me. Do you think institutions play a vital role? For sure, but their role waters down if the society gets too diversified and this institution struggles to keep them all on board? So in a country like Canada, where a lot of people from a lot of part of worlds come pursue their dreams, and a social challenge becomes a thing, you know, and institution at some degree fails to keep everyone on the same page.
Well, I don't think that is a challenge, because I think the institutions that we need to keep us living at peace with each other are not that complex. And the institutions, so we have institutions that keep us, everybody show respect for each other. We have institutions that tell us how we interact economically, who's allowed to buy, who's allowed to sell, what prices, etc., etc. We have institutions that are political institutions that tell us who gets to represent, who gets to vote, what are the rules, who gets to demonstrate and disagree, etc. These are a whole set of political institutions. And those basic institutions are not difficult to learn, as you would have found out from your experience. Within 6 months, you had a pretty good idea of what you needed to do.
What is expected of me, and
But I think the whole idea of having different people of different ethnicities or backgrounds, the differences you would encounter has to do with differences in their personal life, in their home life, in how they interact with their friends, how they interact with their family. There is no reason why everyone has to have the same set of rules within the household, within the immediate community, in order for the society to function. If the political institutions, the economic institutions, the broader social institutions everyone agrees on the rules, there's absolutely no reason. And I think your country is a perfect example of that, because India has hundreds of ethnic groups. Now, you do have struggles in terms of religion, but you do not, as far as I know, ethnicity itself per se has never been the biggest challenge in India. It's religion that's been the biggest challenge.
Religion, caste, and things like those.
Those sort of things. But in terms of, someone from the south thinking they can't interact with someone from the north or from the east or from the west, that's not the basic problem. And I think I would hesitate to say the majority, but a large number of countries are made up of multiple ethnicities and survive quite well. I don't really think that that's fundamentally a problem if everybody agrees on the larger set of rules and norms that we follow when we interact. So I think the idea that we need to be very similar in order for us to do well it sort of isn't borne out by the evidence. Some of the most successful countries in the world have been, even Britain, the first industrialized country. You have to remember, Britain is not a single ethnic group. Yes, they are all technically one race, but of course, race is itself a construct. But they're ethnically, there's the Welsh, there's the Scots, and there's the English, and they didn't always get along, but they were, as a group, they were far more successful than they probably would have been as individual ethnic groups. So, and you can see, I think the Germans are the same. We think of them as a single group, but they are not. There are many ethnicities in Germany. Most of the countries that we see as being hyper successful, etc., are composed of multiple ethnicities, and they have been quite successful. So I don't think fundamentally that is a problem. It's whether you can construct political, social, economic institutions that everyone can sort of easily understand and function within. And that in and of itself, I don't think is particularly difficult. Because, for example, if you take Canada, if you come to Canada as an immigrant, for example, by definition, you've already understood that you go into a new country that has new rules, new norms, new expectations, etc. And so you have a willingness to follow those rules and norms. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think the idea of multiculturalism has more to do with what you get to do when you get home, when you interact with your immediate community, and I don't think that itself need be challenging, and I think it just makes it more interesting.
That's an interesting way to put it. So, we earlier brought China in the conversation.
Yeah.
You must be aware of this China debt trap policy and how they loan out money to these economies around the world, and once they are unable to, and they default on the loan, they take over the infrastructure.
The infrastructure, yeah.
So this type of diplomacy, we have never seen this before to some degree, right?
Yes.
So a country coming from nothing became rich and then used that money to, demonstrate their power around the world, especially Africa and India, parts of Sri Lanka. And what do you think of that? I mean, where does it ends, or where is it heading?
Well, I think I'm not sure where it's headed. I wouldn't try to pretend that I can predict. But I think what we have to understand is that what China does is to bring a totally different approach and a totally different perception of both what it is to what development is and how it interacts with other countries. So China is not a colonizing power, and so the way that it interacts with the developing world is totally different. So Britain, the United States, the European countries, and Japan, uh, uh, they're they're starting in terms of their interaction with the developing world. It started from a position of colonization.
True.
They
Yeah.
colonize you, they control the country, they extract resources, etc. And so the way in which they have interacted with these countries has been through that same sort of lens and uh, that same basic approach or paternalistic approach that I am ahead of you technologically and otherwise.
I'm advanced
I
and
am advanced and I'm helping you, you know,
to uplift you guys. Yeah.
because you were incapable. Ignoring the fact that many of these countries were impoverished by those very
Nations
countries.
themselves, yeah.
But they've sold themselves the story that
And they've been quite good at selling that story.
Oh, very good, because the countries themselves believe it.
Yeah.
The colonized countries, one of the biggest challenges I have teaching development is to try to get my students to understand that their country is not poor because it is inherently poor, because their ancestors were lazy, because they're not smart, because that's what they've been sold and they believe it. And so it's just getting them out of that framework is sometimes very hard because they are convinced that being underdeveloped is their fault. They're underdeveloped because Europe and North America was working hard and doing things and being smart, and they were just lazing about doing nothing. And so that's why they're underdeveloped. So they have been sold that story. And so that the way in which these countries interact with the developing world is through aid, which they give typically cheap money or sometimes free money. It's also called, probably the official name is official development assistance. Aid is just another way of describing it. But they will, when they give these countries this money, there's usually conditions. They usually give the money for the things they're interested in, not necessarily what that country wants or needs, but what they're. So, for example, Canada gives most of its money for projects or programs relating to women and girls, which is in and of itself not a terrible thing, except that it may not necessarily be what a particular country is mostly interested in. It may be more interested in something else, but it says to Canada, but I need money for something else. But Canada says, no, I'm giving money for women and girls, and if you're not looking for money for women and girls, you need to go somewhere else. So,
you're off the list. Yeah.
So the country gets to determine what it gives the money for, how much it gives, what conditions it gives the money to, and not necessarily what the country's needs and interests are. And God forbid that the country has a political ideology that is not, that the developed country is not in agreement with. Then they withdraw their money. I'm not giving you money. I don't like what you're up to. You're socialist or communist or whatever. So I'm not going to give you any more money. So that's that paternalistic arrangement where the developed countries sort of gets to call the shots. It has, as you well know, lots of disadvantages, some of which I've already described, that the country doesn't get to determine how much it gets most of the time, and for
Where
what.
does that money go? Yeah.
China comes from a different perspective. It's not a colonizing power, but it has its own interests as well. And I think one of the things we have to avoid is the getting into the trap of believing that because China is not Britain, for example, it'll be all of the bad things about Britain China will not have, and it'll be perfect. Well, China has its own issues and its own baggage, its own preferences, etc. And one of its the advantages that China brings is that it's not really interested in where the country falls on the ideological spectrum. So if you want to be ultra capitalist or socialist or communist, that's doesn't China will not determine that it's not helping you or giving you money, etc. for that reason. So it doesn't. It has a principle of non-interference. It doesn't tell a government what it should do and where it should fall in the ideological spectrum. It also doesn't tell the government that it loans money to what they can do with the money. So they can use it for whatever they feel is most appropriate. However, China doesn't believe in giving free money except explicitly. If it does, China does give grants, but it's explicit grants. Okay, I'm giving you that money free. You're going to do what you've determined you're going to do with it. That's fine. But if it gives loans, it's very serious about those loans. Those loans are going to be paid. Okay, and so that's one of the what one might call disadvantages of dealing with China, that you're not going to get free money. Or if it's not free money, it actually is not free. You can't sort of appeal to China's guilt. You could appeal to US guilt or British or French guilt, but China doesn't have anything to feel guilty about. It lent you money, you're not paying the money.
Yeah, it's a transaction.
It's a transaction. It's purely a transaction. And so I think it's up to those countries to be very clear on what that interaction is. I'm borrowing from China, and these are the conditions under which I'm borrowing, and I have to be careful about it. I think in many ways, I think for those countries, what it should do is sharpen the focus on and making them recognize that development is not something that somebody does for you. China will not develop you any more than the Europeans and the Americans or the Japanese would develop you. You have to determine what's going to take you forward to wherever it is you want to go, and you have to be very clear-eyed in doing so. So if you're borrowing from China, you have to be very cognizant of what the conditions are and what the consequences might be if it doesn't go right. So I think that China is just another challenge. I think, official development assistance from the West, from Europe and the Americas had its challenges, and I think there were many traps in there for countries. Mm-hmm. I think similarly, money from China has its traps as well.
100%.
So the country simply has to be, it just requires countries to be more aware and more cognizant and not expecting that anyone is going to give them money or assistance purely because they love them or they want, what's best for them. I think...
I also think these colonial nations of the past are stuck in their ways of that past thinking of giving money for a thing that needs to be done right now, whereas China is willing to play the long-term game. He's like, I'll come here, build infrastructure for you from this money. I'll loan you this money, and we'll build this infrastructure for you because you can't build it for yourself. They bring in all the expertise, engineering
That's one
stuff.
of the negatives, though. That's one.
So it doesn't create any jobs in that.
That's exactly, and it doesn't transfer the technology very quickly, and that's one of the things. Because I have seen in Africa, China building buildings or roads in those countries, and they bring the engineers, the
whole construction crew. Yeah,
but. Yes, when it's done and the Chinese leave, you've got a wonderful road. But do you have the technology being transferred so that you can build another road just like it, or you can fix it when it needs to be fixed, etc. So I think that's problematic. And here again is part of the problem, in the same way that many of those countries do not negotiate, do hardball negotiations with Western countries, they don't do it with China. If you want to get something out of it, then you have to negotiate, make a deal, play hardball if you must. Get less perhaps than you would have gotten, but get the right thing. So
Do your due
yeah,
diligence.
instead
Yeah.
of getting a road that 100-kilometer road, maybe you should settle for a 50-kilometer road that has
And
the
see if
things
you can sustain that
exactly
and then
exactly
proceed further. Yeah.
proceed. Yeah. So I think development is a conscious.
And you brought up a very cool
thing.
point earlier. You said a country itself should be in charge of developing it instead of thinking that someone else will come from outside, help us uplift. And
We do not have any example in history of a country being developed by another country.
true, it's usually exploited for resources. And yeah.
Yes.
And that's very inherent to humans as well. I wake up every day to take care of myself first. And if I'm good enough, I'll take care of people around me.
Yeah.
Right? And that applies to countries as well to some degree. That Sweden's not going to wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to fix that country in Africa or anything. Right?
Yeah, and even if they wanted to, the Swedes have learned how to make Sweden into a prosperous country. That doesn't mean the skills, the knowledge that they have is going to allow them to make Sierra Leone into a prosperous country.
True.
Because to begin with, the most important element of what makes a country prosperous is its people. So even if the Swedes came and they made fancy roads, fancy buildings, but the Sierra Leoneans don't have the education, they don't have the skills, they don't have because most of technology is in our brain. It's not something standing there in a machine. Some of it is in a machine, some of it is written, but most of it is in our brain. It's the engineer. If you take an engineer who can build a bridge from one area to the next, he can build the same bridge if he has the same conditions and the same materials. Okay, so it's that technology is largely in his brain. And so if you do not have a people that can absorb a technology, that can use the education to transform technology from somewhere else to make it fit their environment, technological adaptation it's called, to educate themselves, to learn how to maintain what they have, learn how to fix their challenges, learn how to innovate, to use what they have to make it better and to sell services or goods to others so that they can buy what they need. If you don't have a people who could do that for themselves, then you cannot have development.
True. And I think you brought up a very cool point. You said country is as good as its people, right?
Yes, yes. This is probably the hardest lesson in development for people, and I'm talking here about governments, my students, the everyday people on the street. This is the hardest concept I have found as a development economist to transfer to people. Because even as a kid, I remember others, the elders, saying that we're poor because we don't have resources. We don't have oil, we don't have iron, we don't have bauxite. We don't. When people think about development, they think about you have something special to sell to somebody so that you can get money and buy fancy stuff. That's what's going to make you develop. And then you sort of look back at history and you realize, there are lots of countries that are full of resources and are still desperately poor. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the perfect example. Nigeria is rich in resources, has struggled for many years. The oil-rich country has struggled for many years to grow at the rate of most other countries in Africa. We have lots of countries that Venezuela is another example. We have lots of countries that are rich in resources.
And still couldn't
And
get
still,
uplifted.
still struggling. Most of Latin America, whether you're talking about Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, they're still very much developing countries, very, very rich in resources. Okay. That's not what is critical. Resources are helpful. But if you are to determine why, for example, was Japan the first non-European or European offshoot country to become developed, to become a capitalist, high
Because they like
functioning
building
country?
things and they were doing technological advancements. And
It was
yeah.
because the Japanese they educated themselves, they learned the technologies they needed to learn, they transferred and adapted the institutions they felt they needed, but it wasn't because Japan had oil or silver or gold or any
None of those.
none of those.
Yeah.
It was because the Japanese people gave themselves access or got access to the technology, educated themselves, they gained access to technology, they adapted the technologies they needed, they were entrepreneurial, and that too is a human skill. To be a good, as you well know, to be an entrepreneur is not something you can actually learn in school. It's an attribute that you can develop, and the more you develop it, the better you are at it. And some people have it, and some people don't. And if you have it and you develop it further, you can be exceptional at it, etc. But this is all human. It's not something you take from the shelf and you add to your skill set. It's something you develop. So all of these are human attributes. So if you have a group of people who have skills, education, entrepreneurial ability, and willingness to do whatever they need to do to get to wherever they want to go, then you have all the main elements for development. But having gold, oil, silver
Doesn't solve your
is
problem.
not going to solve your problem. In fact, it can be a curse, as it is in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
yeah.
It's actually,
Causes
one can argue
problems.
that had the Democratic Republic of the Congo not had those resources, it probably would be a lot better off.
You're saying this because of all the political system or the framework DRC is struggling with?
Yes, well, it began with the country being exploited for those resources. You have a set of institutions of exploitation, starting with the Belgians when they colonized the country. Essentially, they did the opposite of what development would be. They disadvantaged the population, essentially pretty much enslaved the population. So took away their freedom, forced them, you had forced labor. The whole idea of, people associate the idea of people's hands being chopped if they misbehaved with Liberia. I don't know if you know about in the last war in Liberia, where people were having their hands chopped if they were considered to be enemies or not following rules and instructions given to them as a way of punishing them. That came from the Congo. And before that, Indonesia, the Dutch in Indonesia, then the Belgians in the Congo, essentially pretty much as close to enslavement as you could get, but forcing the population to exploit the local resources for the benefit of the Belgians. And in the post-independence era, you essentially have other entities, mostly private entities, doing pretty much the same. A large part of the reason why the first president of the Congo was assassinated was because he wanted to change that structure, where foreigners came in and were able to exploit those resources as cheaply as possible. And he wanted domestic ownership of those resources. And that was that is the general understanding that was the cause of his demise, and he was replaced by Mobutu, who essentially was like the bandit king. He said, "You pay me and you can exploit that. You pay me and you can exploit that." And he lasted until pretty much not quite, but almost to his death, because he pleased those private enterprises that wanted to exploit
From the
it.
outside countries, yeah.
He gave them access, and all they had to do was pay him off or pay his henchmen off, and the country continued to be exploited for decades. I think there's and I don't remember where that quote came from, but I'm pretty sure it's not far from the truth. That the mileage of road in the Congo when Mobutu became president was longer than when he died.
Okay. So.
And that was over several decades. I think at least 3 decades, if not more. It may have been even.
So the mileage of road was more when he came into power, and
yes.
by the time he left.
Yes.
So
that's an illustration. That may not be quite correct, but I think it's an illustration of.
It gives you the idea what
went down. It gives you the idea of how a country with all those resources continues to produce this all during this period. Congo is producing lots of everything: gold, diamonds, cobalt, all kinds of different resources are being extracted from the Congo. But you have over more than 4 decades, essentially nothing happening.
No
While
growth for the locals.
Being extracted, nothing happening. And so it's an illustration that resources aren't. It's not that a country with resources will not develop. You have many countries that have. Brazil, for example, have done well with their resources. Chile is a very good example of a resource-rich country that has done very well. But part of the reason why Chile has done very well its resources is that's gone beyond the resources. Chile didn't settle for selling copper. It was a great producer of copper for well over a century, but moved on to agricultural goods, to manufacturing goods, and other. So it diversified.
And it developed techniques and manufacturing.
Right. Educated its population, etc. So it developed not because copper prices were high and Chile became rich because copper prices were high. It developed because it used that income from copper to develop its industry, to develop its agriculture, to develop its financial sector, to do many things, so that it is now capable of doing many things, not just
even if the copper goes away one day.
If copper prices are low, Chile is not going to go into recession because copper prices are low, because it has other things that it can
I think you have very well established this fact that the resource itself doesn't guarantee a success of a country. It can
help if the country is able to use it well.
But it's mostly the people and the system that allows them to
It's
excel.
always the people. You don't have any developed country in which you do not have a significant portion of the population that is well educated, highly skilled, highly entrepreneurial, and are able to harness those abilities to create what they want.
I think also the external influence or the sovereignty of the country matters too. So if someone comes from the outside and starts mingling with your resources and you allow open doors, okay, take whatever you want and pay me this much, as we have seen in DRC, that can diminish a lot of...
Well, no, I think I mentioned it earlier. No one's going to develop your country for you. And I think this is probably the hardest lesson I find in terms of trying to explain development.
How do we uncondition then? So coming from that part of the world, understanding how resources works and everything, but the conditioning itself that...
But let's circle back to what you said, what you mentioned earlier, that the part of the colonial experience is us being taught that we were colonized and we were backwards because we didn't have the capacity. We just not up to it, and
Yeah.
we need others in order to get to that level. And I think that's part of the problem, that we have inculcated that idea so much that we're willing to believe that we're not capable. And so part of the reason why we want someone else to come in and teach us, because we believe that we just don't have it in us. And so that idea of initiative, of taking the initiative on our own to get what we want, to develop internal capacity, that stands in the way, because if you don't believe you're up to it, you've lost the first
Battle over
you've lost the first battle. And I think if you look, one of the things I try to do to explain to students what that difference is if you look at how the Japanese developed. Okay, the Japanese had encountered the Westerners when Europe first went out to Asia. The Chinese didn't want to deal with the Europeans at all. They thought they were dirty, uncivilized, etc., etc. They kept them at arm's length. They wouldn't even allow them on Chinese soil. They had to go to Taiwan or to Macau to trade with the Chinese because they didn't want to deal with them. The Japanese were quite open. They allowed them to trade with them, to live in Japan if they wanted to. They brought missionaries, and then they started to Christianize the Japanese, and that caused a problem. They were also fighting among each other, and so the Japanese kicked them all out and closed Japan to Europeans. Okay. Then in the late 19th century, relatively young, Commander Perry, U.S. naval, I'm not sure he was, I think he was a captain, not an admiral. It was a captain, Captain Matthew Perry, I remember. Yeah. Matthew, I won't be held responsible for. Perry, it was his last name. I may be mixing it up with someone else, but Perry was his last name. Mm-hmm. And he essentially engaged in gunboat diplomacy. He sailed into Tokyo
What
Harbor.
diplomacy?
Gunboat diplomacy.
Gunboat
diplomacy.
Okay.
So just to explain what gunboat diplomacy is, and because the U.S. is famous for using it, you're not happy with so to give you an actual example of what can happen with gunboat diplomacy. So Honduras threatens to nationalize the banana, the multinationals that grow bananas in Honduras to sell to the U.S. Mm-hmm. And so the companies go to the U.S. government and say, the Honduran government wants to nationalize us. We don't like that. You need to do something. So the U.S. government sends 2 battleships, the anchor of the coast of Honduras, and then the U.S. government sends a message to the president of Honduras and say, well, we need you to reconsider this
nationalizing this resource, yeah.
Well, of course. You've got 2 battleships at you. That's gunboat diplomacy. They're talking nicely, but
putting a knife on your neck and saying,
yes, exactly. That's exactly the point. You put a knife at it. Nice talking, we're negotiating, but one of us has a knife. So we're going to give whatever the other person is asking for. So that's classic gunboat diplomacy. So Perry goes to Tokyo Harbor and says that you're going to trade with us whether you like it or not, and it's going to be on those terms, which are not favorable to the Japanese. And so they realize that, if they don't do something, they will be colonized within a decade or less. And so they essentially go into this hyperdrive phase where they restore the emperor. It's called the Meiji Restoration. Restructure the society, engage in a land reform, all kinds of changes in the institutional structure of the society, send Japanese to Europe, young Japanese men to Europe to learn about how they do things, pay experts from the US and Europe to teach them how to do things, essentially technology transfer. You get somebody who knows something. Remember what I said earlier about most of technology is in people's heads. So you get them, you teach you how to develop and use the technology. They engage in this at a essentially in hyperdrive, because this is extremely rapid attempt at industrialization, because they're trying to develop a capitalist economy that can compete with the Europeans and the Americans, so that they are not colonized. And so by the turn of the century, so this happens in 1868, I believe. 1868 or 1864, I can't remember the exact date, but in the 1860s. And by 2000, I think 2005, they are able to engage in a war with Russia and defeat Russia handily, because they are now a fully fledged capitalist economy that can produce ships and
ammunition
and
everything.
all they need to engage in battle, and also to trade, etc. So the lesson here is that once they decided they wanted to be a developed capitalist economy, they consciously engaged in doing so, developing the institutions they needed, transferring the technology they needed. But and they brought notice that when they brought people over, it was to teach them, and
not to just do it for them.
Sometimes they kidnap them too, and not to come and take over and run things and we work for you. No, teach us how to do it. Once you've taught us, you can go.
Yeah.
We know how to do it, you can go. So they were extracting the technology. They did not believe that the technology was specific to Europeans or to Americans. They saw technology as being something that these people had. You have something I want. I want to get that thing from you. I don't need you to have it. You can give it to me, I can have it. And I think that because they had not been colonized, they had no reason to believe that the Europeans and the Americans were more advanced than them, because they were inherently better. They believed correctly that they had developed something that they hadn't developed yet. So you get what it is they
So it's a cultural thing that Japanese were able to, understand that the Europeans or Americans aren't better, or they just have something that we want at this point, and teach us how to fish. Don't fish for us.
They had not been essentially told that they were incapable. They had no reason to believe that they were incapable, because they had not been colonized. So if someone's doing something better than you, then you figure, well, they've either developed it or they've learned it. And if they can do it, so can I. They're human. I'm human. So, and I think once they decided they wanted to develop a capitalist economy, the issue was how. It was not can we. And that's the important thing. They never asked the question, can we? All they asked was, how do we do it? And they made mistakes along the way. For example, their banking system. They used the American system. It crashed. It didn't work.
Cheap money and 0% interest and all that.
Not that. It was a little more complicated than that. But they gave it up and used the Belgian system, which worked better for them. So it was not that it was perfect. They did everything perfectly. But what it was important that when they made a mistake, they didn't believe because we're stupid, we're not capable. Oh my goodness, we'll never make it. No, it's that we made the wrong choice. Let's start again, learn our lessons.
So they had the capacity to tinker with things, and they knew along the way they'll make some mistakes, but they'll course correct themselves.
Of course. And that was the critical thing. And if you look at any developed country, any country that developed, particularly the later developers, they all made mistakes. South Korea, similarly, even China has made a few errors along the way. It's inevitable. You can't do everything perfectly. And you learning in any case. No country that is being developed has ever been developed before. You're doing something new.
True. So you will make mistakes.
So you will make mistakes because no one has charted the path for you. So you have to chart a new path. So you get to one place and you think you should go left, and it turns out left not the right direction to go.
Yeah.
So you course correct and you go right, and you keep doing that, and
it can't be done in a way that you can take a blueprint from a developed nation and see if that will completely work. You will still have to do it in your own way.
It will never quite work. You can take lessons from other countries, but you cannot take a full blueprint because for two reasons. One is that each society is different, so what works in one country is not necessarily going to work in another. And secondly, and that's just as important, the people who developed the country are no longer alive, and the people who exist at the moment don't actually know how they got to where they are. So if you encounter and Americans, a very good example is that most Americans would argue, and I'm not talking about the ordinary Americans, I'm talking about the economists and the people who would advise people with respect to development, believe that free markets, unrestricted trade, etc., is the way to go. This is the way you develop the most productive society, etc. And they would argue this is how America became the country it is, because it had open free markets, free trade, etc.
It's one of the finest products of capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Except that if you look at American history, that's not true.
How so?
Well, there's that famous play that trying to remember. Famous hip hop play. What's the name of one of the founding fathers? Not trying to remember.
See if we can find it.
Not Washington.
Hamilton.
Hamilton. Yes.
Okay.
He was well, I don't know if he was technically an economist, but he was one of the first secretaries of the Treasury. And the way in which he and this is written, this is not sort of hidden history, just not history that is generally accessed. The plan he developed for America to industrialize was to put up tariffs against British industrial goods so that it would allow American companies
To develop industries here.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a strategy that it was done by the Germans as well. Everyone on the course of development set up barriers to trade in order to give their domestic firms an opportunity to develop. Also, right into the 20th century, America was well known for having the highest amount of tariffs in general of all the industrialized countries. So that the idea that America was always the bastion of free trade is sort of goes directly against history. But that's what they believe. So when they sell a development, they will sell the development of America today, not America of the 19th century. But it is America of the 19th century that you want to learn about because they were developing. So in other words, it's not just that you are different. The people who are advising you from, from the top of the hill, but you're at the bottom of the hill. And they're telling you how to live on top of the hill. They're not telling you how to climb the hill.
Get there, yeah.
You need somebody to tell you how to climb the hill.
True. And people look at the finished product instead
Yes,
of
exactly.
doing
And
the
they
prototype.
project. So the advisors from the developed country look at the economy, how it works, etc., and think it's beautiful. This is why it functions so well, and they'll tell you, now you have to emulate us. If you do what we do, you will be developed. But the process of developing is not the same thing as being developed.
Yeah.
So, for example, Britain in the middle of the 19th century took down most of its tariffs. It went for free trade. Okay, Britain became a free trade, essentially the first country to actually have free trade as its basic the basic principle by which it was not perfectly free trade, but it definitely reduced its tariffs on almost everything by very large amounts. But why did Britain do that? Was that the strategy for Britain's strategy for development? And one can say, therefore, because Britain opted for free trade, that was why Britain developed. No, it's the exact opposite. By that time, Britain was the most advanced industrial sector because it industrialized before everyone else. So by the middle of the 19th century, Britain was far more developed as an industrial society than everybody. It could outproduce everybody else. So it had nothing to fear.
It was the advanced country of the time.
It didn't need to protect its industries from anyone else because everyone else was behind. So free trade is a wonderful idea. So if you were to then argue that because Britain, as an industrial society, opted for free trade, therefore free trade must be the best way to industrialize, you have everything upside down.
You got what do you call it? Re-engineer it to how they started.
Exactly.
How they got here
exactly. So Britain could afford to remove the tariffs because it had nothing to fear from any of its competitors. In fact, at that point, it really didn't have competitors. And that was a perfectly fine decision for Britain. There's nothing wrong with that decision. But it's doing that because it's the most advanced industrial society. If you're trying to develop, that's not the model you want to follow. The model you want to follow is a country that's trying to get to that point, as was at that time, for example, Germany and the US, that were following Britain and trying to develop.
Learning from them. Yeah.
Exactly. But these countries had tariffs to protect their industries.
So that their industry can develop for themselves.
Yes.
Tell me one thing. We earlier brought this club thing that developed nations have their own club.
Yes.
So do you think a country that is called developed today can go back down to developing? So what I mean by that is, if we look at Britain of today, it is more and more getting into a struggling state. Their political system, they have 5 or 7 prime ministers now in past how many years?
Yeah.
So politically they're struggling, and then the freedom of speech is diminishing. As we've seen, they can't even protest now. And all the industries or the industrialization progress they did in the 19th century is going outwards now. It's going to other countries and all that. They're not producing as much as they used to.
Yeah.
So do you think that transition will see?
Well, no, I don't think. I think it's very hard for a country to reach that level of development and truly. Regression is not abnormal at all. But regression to the point where it sort of like becomes more like a developing country than a developed country, I don't really think that's likely, except if there is a catastrophe of some sort. And part of the reason is because a lot of the things that make a country like Britain develop are already hardwired. Okay, so educating its population, the development of certain technology, and learning how to develop new technologies, absorb technologies, etc. The normalization of rules that make a capitalist society function relatively well. All of these are hardwired into the society. So it may not function perhaps as well as it did 2 or 3 decades ago. But in fact, I think the reason why Britain looks like it's going backwards is more because compared to countries around it, it's not. It used to be the star. So if you used to be the star and then you become just like everybody else, you've come down. But technically, you're not that bad. But you just come down from where you used to be. So I think Britain is. We can't expect Britain to be the Britain of the late 19th century or late 19th century anymore. It will not. But I think it will be okay. I mean, life expectancy in Britain is still higher than it is in the United States. You need to remember that. So certainly it's not a star anymore, but it's struggling. It'll struggle along, and I think in Europe in general is going through a malaise, because I think for 2 centuries they were dominant in the world, and that dominance is fading. I think that's normal. It doesn't mean that they're going to become a complete backwater, but they're not going to be their turn as the center of the world. I think have come to an end, but that's the norm. I don't think it's not a crisis.
Makes sense.
As the historians will tell you, the center of the world, the economic, technological, and even cultural center of the world for most of human history has been in Asia. So the fact that it's going back to Asia is sort of like just rebalance. Many people, the Chinese and the Indians, would say, we're just getting back what we used to have.
Interesting.
So it's for people in the West, it seems like a crisis, but in the long durée of human history, it's nothing that unusual.
So far, what I've been able to understand is for a country to become prosperous, it either can do a technological advancement, resource rich, and could be resource rich.
Resource rich can help, but it can also be a problem.
It won't guarantee.
It won't guarantee. It can be as much of a curse as a benefit. It depends on how you use it. But you don't need it. That's the important thing. You don't have to be resource
And the third that I think can play a vital role is the population itself. If they can unlearn the old conditioning, get the new conditioning in, and understand that they are the ones who need to take it forward. Nobody's going to come and tell them to do this.
Well, I would make an adjustment. It's not that it wouldn't help. It's required. Without that, it wouldn't develop. It's required. It's required. A country cannot be developed if its people are not capable of upholding whatever they have, reproducing it. So if you are given fancy stuff, okay, think about this. If you're given something for your birthday, it's something very nice, but you don't know how it works, okay, it's going to last until it breaks down. It's not infinite. And when it breaks down, that's the end. You don't have it anymore.
Because I didn't know how to use it in the first place. Yeah.
So if you want to be developed, whatever fancy stuff you have or you get, you have to be able to rebuild it, fix it, improve it.
To have the ability to, because if China comes and builds you something and you don't know how to sustain
then
it's of no use.
Yes, it perhaps helpful, but it doesn't make you. It doesn't take you on the road to development unless you've learned something from it or you are able to use it to get you something else that's more permanent. But if you are not able to make the essentially the institutional infrastructure of a developed country is a way of doing things and a way of understanding the world that allows that country to take care of itself to a certain level. And that is in people. It's in people's brain and in the way people interact. The way people interact, I would call institutions. What's in people's brain is a large part of the technology that we use to maintain our standard of living, etc. Without those things, it's a passing phase. You can have fancy buildings and fancy roads and fancy this and fancy that, and it fades because you can't maintain it and reproduce it. So it's the population. It's always the population.
Listen, Professor, this has been a great conversation. I know we can go for hours more, but thank you for your time,
No problem.
and I enjoyed it.
I did too. Thank